The sharp whistle of the steam engine pierced through Victoria Montgomery's chest like a knife, and as the train lurched to its final stop in Palisade, Colorado, she gripped the worn leather handle of her carpetbag so tightly her knuckles turned white beneath her thin cotton gloves. Through the soot-streaked window, the August sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly on the dusty platform where a handful of figures waited, their faces obscured by the shimmering heat rising from the wooden planks, and she wondered desperately which one of those distant shapes belonged to the man whose letters had convinced her to leave everything she knew behind in Philadelphia. The conductor's gruff voice called out the station, and Victoria rose on trembling legs, her navy traveling dress clinging to her damp skin, despite the modest cut that covered her from collar to wrist to ankle. 22 years old and now completely alone in the world after yellow fever had taken her parents and younger brother within a single terrible month. She had answered Carter Xavier's advertisement with equal parts desperation and hope, his careful penmanship and earnest words painting a picture of a life that seemed impossibly distant from the cramped boarding house where she had been taking in mending just to afford bread and thin soup. She descended the metal steps with exaggerated care, one hand clutching the railing while the other maintained its death grip on her bag. Her foot touched solid ground, and immediately her knees threatened to buckle. The altitude felt different here, the air thinner, and the vast expanse of sky stretching endlessly overhead made her feel exposed in a way the narrow streets of Philadelphia never had. Mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat, and the town itself seemed to huddle against the landscape, as if afraid of being swept away by the immensity of it all. "Miss Montgomery." The voice came from her left, low and gentle, carrying a warmth that immediately cut through the panic threatening to overwhelm her. Victoria turned, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the man approaching her with careful, measured steps. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his clean, but well-worn shirt. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart, a remarkable shade of green that reminded her of the moss that grew on the stone walls back home, filled with such kindness and concern that tears immediately sprang to her own. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Xavier." "Carter, please." He removed his hat, revealing more of those dark curls, and offered her a smile that reached all the way to those extraordinary eyes. "I know you have had a long journey. Are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale, if you do not mind me saying." The genuine concern in his voice, the complete absence of judgment or impatience, somehow made everything worse and better simultaneously. A small sound escaped her throat, not quite a sob but close, and she felt her entire body begin to shake in earnest now that the moment she had been dreading and anticipating for 6 long weeks had finally arrived. Carter closed the distance between them immediately, though he did not touch her, respecting the propriety of their situation even as his entire posture radiated a desire to offer comfort. "Hey now," he said softly, his voice dropping even lower, intimate despite the public setting. "It is all right. I know this must be terrifying. You have traveled over 1,000 miles to meet a stranger, left everything familiar behind. Anyone would be shaking in your shoes." "I am sorry," Victoria whispered, blinking rapidly against the tears. "I promised myself I would be composed, that I would not be a silly, weeping female the moment we met." "There is nothing silly about being afraid," Carter said firmly, still in that gentle tone that somehow made her feel safer than she had in months. "And I would rather you be honest about your feelings than put on a false face for my benefit. "We are going to be married, Victoria. May I call you Victoria?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. "Victoria," he repeated, as if testing the shape of her name on his tongue. "We are going to be spending our lives together. I hope that means we can be truthful with one another from the start. If you are frightened, you can say so. If you are having doubts, we can discuss them. I did not bring you all this way to trap you into something that will make you miserable." This declaration, so unexpected and earnest, finally gave Victoria the strength to truly look at him. His face was handsome in a weathered sort of way, all strong lines and honest features, but it was the openness of his expression that struck her most forcefully. There was no guile there, no hidden agenda lurking behind his words. He meant exactly what he said. "I am frightened," she admitted, her voice steadying slightly. "But I am not having doubts. Not about coming here, not about the arrangement we made. I am just overwhelmed, I think." Carter's shoulders relaxed visibly, and his smile returned, warmer than before. "That is completely understandable. Why do not we get you somewhere cooler? The altitude takes some getting used to, and standing in this sun is not helping matters. We can go to the hotel where I have reserved you a room, get you some water and a chance to rest. We do not have to rush anything." "A hotel?" Victoria repeated, surprised. "I thought we were to be married right away." "We can be, if that is what you want," Carter said carefully. "Reverend Phillips is available whenever we choose. But I thought you might appreciate a day or two to catch your breath, to get to know me a bit before we stand up in front of witnesses and make our vows. I want you to feel comfortable with this decision, Victoria. With me." The consideration evident in every word made something tight in Victoria's chest begin to loosen. For weeks, she had been bracing herself for disappointment, for the reality to fall devastatingly short of the letters they had exchanged. She had prepared herself for a man who might be cold, or crude, or impatient with her Eastern sensibilities. But Carter Xavier, standing before her in the Colorado sunshine with dust on his boots and genuine concern in his remarkable eyes, was proving to be exactly the man his letters had suggested, and the relief of it made her almost dizzy. "That would be very kind," she said, managing a tremulous smile. "Thank you." Carter returned her smile with such obvious pleasure that a small warmth began to bloom in her chest, fragile as the first flower of spring but unmistakably there. He gestured toward a wagon waiting nearby, a sturdy vehicle with a canvas cover providing shade over the back. "Your trunk arrived yesterday. I picked it up from the freight office and took the liberty of having it delivered to the hotel already. I hope that was all right." "That was very thoughtful," Victoria said, grateful that she would not have to stand around the platform any longer while he dealt with her belongings. Her legs still felt unsteady, and the world seemed to tilt slightly if she turned her head too quickly. Carter offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and after a moment's hesitation, Victoria slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. Even through the fabric of his shirt, she could feel the solid strength of him, the warmth of his skin. He was real, she thought with something like wonder. This was actually happening. He helped her up onto the wagon seat with careful attention, his hand steadying her briefly at the waist before he stepped back and moved around to climb up on the other side. The leather creaked as he settled beside her and picked up the reins. And then they were moving, leaving the train station behind as they headed into the heart of Palisade. The town was smaller than Victoria had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings lining a single main street with a few side roads branching off at irregular intervals. She saw a general store, a saloon, a building that proclaimed itself the office of a doctor and dentist, and a church with a modest steeple pointing toward the endless sky. People moved along the wooden sidewalks, their faces turning toward the wagon with obvious curiosity, and Victoria felt herself shrinking slightly under their stares. "Everyone is very interested in newcomers," Carter said, clearly noticing her discomfort. "Especially a woman as lovely as you. But they are good people for the most part. They will welcome you once they get used to seeing you around." "For the most part?" Victoria asked, latching onto the qualifier. Carter's expression turned wry. "Every town has its share of gossips and troublemakers. Palisade is no different. But no one who matters will give you any grief, and anyone who tries will have to answer to me." There was a protective edge to his voice that Victoria found both reassuring and slightly thrilling. She studied his profile as he guided the wagon down the street, taking in the strong line of his jaw, and the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings with the alertness of someone accustomed to watching for trouble. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, wanting to know more about this man who had so quickly become the center of her entire future. 5 years, give or take," Carter replied. "I came out from Missouri after the war. Started working as a ranch hand for the Donovan spread, saved my money, and eventually bought my own piece of land about 4 miles outside town. It is not much yet, but the house is solid and the land is good for cattle. I have got about 50 head right now, hoping to expand the herd over the next few years." "You fought in the war?" Victoria asked softly. Carter's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the reins. "I did. Union side. I was young, barely 17 when I enlisted, but I came through it alive and mostly whole, which is more than a lot of men can say." He glanced at her, his expression carefully neutral. "Does that bother you?" "No," Victoria said honestly. "My father supported the Union as well, though he was too old to fight, and my brother would have been too young." "Would have been," she repeated quietly, the loss still raw despite the weeks that had passed. "Your letters mentioned you had lost your family," Carter said gently. "I am truly sorry, Victoria. That must have been unbearably difficult." "It was like the world ended," Victoria heard herself say, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "One day we were all together, planning for Samuel's birthday, and then he fell ill, and then my mother, and then my father. 3 weeks from the first fever to my father's funeral. And suddenly, I was alone in a city that did not care whether I lived or died, with barely enough money to bury them properly." Carter made a sound of sympathy, low in his throat. "And that is when you decided to answer my advertisement." "I had been reading them for a few days," Victoria admitted. "Looking at the notices in the paper, trying to understand what kind of man would seek a wife that way. And then I read yours, and something about the way you wrote. The things you said about wanting a partnership rather than just a housekeeper or a pretty ornament. It made me think perhaps you were different. That perhaps this could be a new beginning rather than just another form of desperation." "It can be," Carter said with quiet intensity. "I promise you, Victoria, I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret taking this chance. I know I am just a cowboy with a small ranch and rough hands, but I will work hard to give you a good life, to give us a good life." The sincerity in his voice made Victoria's throat tight with emotion. She had been so afraid that the reality would be a disappointment, that the kind and thoughtful man from the letters would turn out to be a fiction designed to lure her west. But Carter Xavier seemed to be exactly who he had claimed to be, and that made her feel braver than she had in a very long time. The wagon pulled to a stop in front of a 2-story building with a sign declaring it the Rocky Mountain Hotel. It looked clean and respectable, with fresh paint and curtains visible in the windows. Carter set the brake and jumped down, then came around to help Victoria descend, his hands sure and steady at her waist as he lifted her down as though she weighed nothing at all. "Let me show you to your room," he said, offering his arm again. "And then I will leave you to rest for a while. I imagine you would like a chance to wash up and change into something more comfortable. The dining room serves supper at 6 if you feel up to joining me, or I can have something sent up to your room if you would prefer." "I would like to have supper with you," Victoria said, surprised by her own boldness. "If that is all right." Carter's face lit up with obvious pleasure. "That would be wonderful. I will be back at 6 to collect you then." He guided her through the small lobby where a middle-aged woman behind the desk watched them with avid interest, then up a narrow staircase to the second floor. He stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall and produced a key from his pocket, unlocking it and pushing it open to reveal a modest but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a small desk beneath the window. "Your trunk is there," Carter said, gesturing to where her battered steamer trunk sat against one wall. "And I asked them to bring up fresh water and towels. If you need anything else, just let Mrs. Green know. She is the woman downstairs, and she can be a bit of a busybody, but her heart is in the right place." "Thank you," Victoria said, meaning it with her whole heart. "For everything. For being so patient and kind. I know you must think me terribly foolish for being such a nervous wreck." "I think you are incredibly brave," Carter said firmly. "Coming all this way to start a new life with a stranger takes more courage than most people will ever need in their entire lives. I admire you for it, Victoria. Truly." The warmth in his eyes as he spoke made Victoria's cheeks flush, and she found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. "I will see you at 6 then." "At 6, Carter agreed. He hesitated for just a moment, as though he wanted to say something more, then simply touched the brim of his hat in farewell and left, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor as he made his way back down the hall. Victoria closed the door behind him and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She had done it. She was here in Colorado, in a Wild West town that smelled of dust and horse and something green she could not quite identify. And the man who had brought her here, the man whose advertisement had promised respect and partnership and the possibility of affection growing into something more, seemed to be exactly what she had desperately hoped he would be. She moved to the window and looked out at the unfamiliar landscape, the mountains rising in the distance, the wide sky that seemed to go on forever. It was nothing like Philadelphia, nothing like anything she had ever known. But as she thought about Carter's gentle voice and kind eyes, the way he had immediately recognized her fear and moved to ease it without making her feel weak or foolish, she felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Hope. Real, genuine hope that this terrifying leap of faith might actually work out after all. The water in the basin was cool and refreshing, and Victoria took her time washing away the grime of travel, grateful for the privacy and the chance to compose herself. She unpacked her trunk, hanging her 2 good dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her meager collection of personal items on the desk. A daguerreotype of her parents and Samuel made her throat tight, but she placed it carefully where she could see it, needing the reminder of what she had lost even as she reached for what might be gained. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, Victoria had changed into her better dress, a dark green calico that her mother had always said brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. She had repinned her auburn hair, trying to tame the curls that had escaped during her journey, and pinched her cheeks to bring some color back to her pale face. A knock at the door came precisely at the appointed time, and Victoria opened it to find Carter standing there, looking freshly scrubbed and wearing what was clearly his best shirt, a dark blue that made his green eyes even more striking. His hair was still damp, curling more noticeably now, and he smelled faintly of soap and leather and something else, something that made her want to step closer rather than away. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his gaze warm with appreciation. "That color suits you." "Thank you," Victoria said, pleased by the compliment. "You look very handsome as well." Carter's smile turned slightly bashful and he offered his arm. "Shall we? I hope you are hungry. The food here is simple but good. And Mary, the woman who does most of the cooking, makes the best apple pie west of the Mississippi." They descended to the small dining room where half a dozen tables were scattered around the space. Several were already occupied, and Victoria felt multiple pairs of eyes turned toward them with undisguised interest. Carter seemed unconcerned by the attention, guiding her to a table by the window and holding her chair with easy courtesy before taking his own seat. A young woman appeared almost immediately with menus and water, her eyes darting between Victoria and Carter with obvious curiosity. "Evening, Mr. Xavier, and this must be your intended. We have been wondering when she would arrive." "Victoria, this is Anne Collins," Carter said easily. "Anne, Miss Victoria Montgomery, lately of Philadelphia." "Philadelphia!" Anne exclaimed, her eyes going wide. "That is a long way to come. What brings you all the way out here to our little town?" "Anne," Carter said, his tone friendly but firm. "Perhaps we could order before the interrogation begins." Anne had the grace to look abashed. "Of course. Sorry. We have got beef stew tonight or fried chicken with potatoes, and there is fresh bread and butter, and Mary did make apple pie like you said she might, Mr. Xavier." They placed their orders, and Anne hurried away, though Victoria could see her immediately lean toward another server and begin whispering. Carter caught her expression and grinned. "I did warn you about small towns. Your arrival is probably the most interesting thing to happen here in a month." "I am not sure I care for being interesting," Victoria admitted. "I was always more comfortable blending into the background." "You could not blend into the background if you tried," Carter said, his tone matter of fact rather than flirtatious. "You are far too lovely and you carry yourself with too much grace. People are going to notice you, Victoria, but that is not a bad thing. Let them look. Let them wonder. What matters is how we feel about each other, not what anyone else thinks." The casual way he included himself in that statement, the easy assumption that there would be a we, and that their feelings for each other would matter, made Victoria's pulse quicken. "You seem very certain that we will suit," she observed carefully. "I am hopeful," Carter corrected. "Your letters gave me a sense of who you are, what matters to you, and everything I have seen today confirms what I already suspected. You are intelligent, resilient, and kind. You are also clearly terrified but doing it anyway, which tells me you have a spine of steel beneath all that proper Eastern lady refinement." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. "But I also know that letters and a few hours' acquaintance are not the same as truly knowing someone. That is why I want to give us time, Victoria. Time to talk, to learn each other's ways, to see if what looks promising on paper can actually work in reality." "And if it does not?" Victoria asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her throughout her journey. "What happens if you decide I am not what you wanted after all?" "Then I will make sure you have enough money to go back east if that is what you choose," Carter said without hesitation. "Or to go somewhere else and start over. I will not leave you stranded here, Victoria. You have my word on that." "But I do not think that is going to be necessary. I think we are going to get along just fine." The confidence in his voice was reassuring rather than arrogant, and Victoria found herself relaxing slightly. "I think so too," she admitted. "I was so afraid you would not be like your letters, that it would all turn out to be a terrible mistake. But you seem to be exactly the man who wrote to me about wanting a partnership, about believing a marriage should be built on mutual respect and affection." I meant every word, Carter assured her. I have seen too many marriages where the woman was treated like property or an unpaid servant. My own mother had to endure that kind of life, and I swore I would never make a woman feel that way. When I decided I was ready to marry, I knew I wanted something different. Someone who would be a true partner, someone I could talk to and laugh with and build a life alongside. Why a mail-order bride, though? Victoria asked, genuinely curious. Surely there are women here who would have been interested in marrying you. Carter's expression turned rueful. There are exactly 3 unmarried women of appropriate age in Palisade, and one of them is my boss's daughter who I have known since she was 10 years old, which makes the thought feel deeply wrong. The other 2 are nice enough, but we have nothing in common, and I could not imagine spending the rest of my life trying to make conversation with either of them. I wanted someone who could talk about something other than recipes and gossip, someone who had seen a bit of the world and had thoughts about it. And you thought a desperate widow from Philadelphia would fit that description? Victoria asked with a touch of wry humor. I thought a woman brave enough to answer an advertisement from a stranger and travel halfway across the country would be someone worth knowing, Carter said seriously. And your first letter confirmed it. You wrote about losing your family, yes, but you also wrote about the books you had been reading, your thoughts about the changes happening in the country, your hope that the West might offer opportunities that the East no longer could. You were honest about your circumstances, but not self-pitying. You asked intelligent questions about my life and my plans. I knew after that first letter that I wanted to know you better. Their food arrived, interrupting the conversation, but the atmosphere between them had shifted into something warmer, more comfortable. They ate and talked about inconsequential things, about the journey west and the differences between Philadelphia and Colorado, about the ranch and what Victoria might expect from life here. It will be isolated, Carter warned her honestly. The house is 4 miles from town, and in the winter we might be snowed in for days at a time. I have got 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, good men both, but they keep to themselves mostly. It will be mostly just us, Victoria. If you are used to city life, to having neighbors close by and shops to visit, it might feel very lonely at first. I think I might welcome the quiet, Victoria said thoughtfully. The city felt very lonely after my family died. Being surrounded by thousands of people who did not know or care about me was worse than being actually alone. At least here, the solitude would be honest. Carter studied her with those remarkable eyes, and something in his expression softened. You have thought about this seriously, haven't you? This was not just a panic decision. It started as a panic decision, Victoria admitted. But I had 6 weeks on the train to think about it, to read and reread your letters, to imagine what this life might be like. And the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. Like maybe this was where I was supposed to end up all along. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility, and Carter reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, his calloused fingers closed gently around hers, warm and solid and real. I am glad you are here, he said quietly, his thumb brushing softly over her knuckles. I know everything is strange and frightening right now, but I truly believe we can make this work, Victoria. I truly believe we can be happy together. Victoria looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-darkened skin and her pale fingers, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was too soon for love, she knew that. They barely knew each other beyond words on paper. But the foundation was there, solid and promising, and she could feel the potential of what they might build together humming in the air between them. I believe that too, she whispered, and was rewarded with a smile that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, and when the promised apple pie arrived, Carter insisted she try it. The first bite melted on her tongue, sweet and tart and absolutely delicious, and her obvious enjoyment made him laugh with pure pleasure. "I knew you would like it," he said triumphantly. "Mary is going to be insufferable when she hears she has another convert to her apple pie." After supper, Carter walked her back upstairs to her room, his hand light and respectful at the small of her back. At her door, he paused, clearly reluctant to leave but equally clearly determined to observe proper behavior. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow, if you feel up to it, I would like to show you around town properly, introduce you to some people. And if you are willing, perhaps we could talk about when you might want to have the wedding. There is no rush," he added quickly. "But I imagine you would like to have some idea of the timeline." "Tomorrow sounds perfect," Victoria said. "And Carter, thank you for making this so much easier than I feared it would be." "It is my pleasure," Carter said, and the sincerity in his voice made it clear he meant it. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a brief, gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Sleep well, Victoria." "You too," she managed, and slipped into her room before she could do something foolish like ask him to stay longer. She leaned against the closed door, her hand tingling where his lips had touched, and smiled into the darkness. It was going to be all right, she thought. More than all right. It was going to be wonderful. The next morning brought bright sunshine and temperatures that were already climbing toward uncomfortable by the time Victoria made her way downstairs for breakfast. She found Carter waiting in the small dining room, looking fresh and alert despite the early hour. His face lit up when he saw her, and he rose immediately to pull out her chair. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Victoria admitted, surprised by how true it was. "I think I was more exhausted than I realized." They ate a simple breakfast of eggs and toast and strong coffee that Victoria was still learning to appreciate, and then Carter led her out into the morning sunshine. The town looked different in daylight, less intimidating somehow. The mountains still loomed in the distance, but they seemed more protective than threatening now, and the wide sky felt expansive rather than overwhelming. Carter guided her along the wooden sidewalk, pointing out the various buildings and telling her about the people who ran them. The general store was owned by a family named Patterson, who had come out from Ohio 5 years earlier. The saloon was run by a former soldier who did not allow things to get too rowdy and would throw out anyone who caused real trouble. The doctor had trained back east and had only been in town for 2 years, but had already earned a reputation as competent and caring. They stopped at the church, a simple wooden structure with a small cemetery behind it. Reverend Phillips was working in the small garden beside the building, and he straightened up when he saw them approach, a smile creasing his weathered face. "Carter," he called out, "and this must be Miss Montgomery. Welcome to Palisade, young lady. We are delighted to have you." The Reverend was in his 60s, with white hair and kind eyes that reminded Victoria achingly of her father. He shook her hand warmly and listened with genuine interest as Carter explained that they were planning to marry, but wanted to take a few days to get better acquainted first. "Very sensible," Reverend Phillips approved. "Marriage is a serious commitment, and it is wise to be sure of your feelings before you make those vows. Though I must say, from the way Carter talks about you, I do not think there is much doubt on his end." Victoria glanced at Carter, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed but did not deny it. "Have you given any thought to when you might want the ceremony?" the Reverend asked. "I am available most days, though Sundays are obviously busy." Victoria looked at Carter, unsure how to answer. They had discussed this in general terms, but not with any specificity. "What would you be comfortable with?" Carter asked her directly. "We can wait as long as you need." Victoria considered the question carefully. Part of her wanted to wait weeks, to have time to be absolutely certain. But another part, the part that had already begun to trust this kind, patient man, wondered what waiting would really accomplish. She already knew she liked him. She already felt safer with him than she had with anyone since her family died. And the practical reality was that she could not stay in the hotel indefinitely. "Would a week be too soon?" she asked hesitantly. "That would give us time to be sure, but it also seems like a reasonable amount of time to prepare." Carter's face broke into a wide smile. "A week sounds perfect." "Next Saturday, if that works for you, Reverend?" "Next Saturday it is," Reverend Phillips agreed, looking pleased. "I will make a note of it. And Miss Montgomery, if you have any questions or concerns as the day approaches, please do not hesitate to come speak with me. I am here to help in any way I can." They thanked him and moved on, continuing their tour of the small town. Carter introduced her to several people along the way, and while Victoria could see curiosity and speculation in their eyes, most were welcoming enough. Mrs. Patterson at the general store insisted on showing her around the store and telling her to come by any time she needed anything. And Dr. Harrison stopped them on the street to introduce himself and assure Victoria that he was available should she ever need medical attention. By midday, Victoria's head was spinning with names and faces, and Carter seemed to sense her overwhelm because he suggested they get some lunch at the hotel and then perhaps take a ride out to see his ranch. "I want you to see where we will be living," he explained. "It is important that you know what you are agreeing to. The house is not fancy, Victoria. It is solid and comfortable, but it is a working ranch, not a showplace." "I am not expecting a palace," Victoria assured him. "I just want to see your home." "Our home," she corrected, testing out the words. Carter's eyes warmed at that, and he squeezed her hand briefly before releasing it. After a simple lunch, Carter brought the wagon around, and Victoria climbed up with more confidence than she had shown the previous day. The altitude still felt strange, but she was adjusting, and the mild dizziness had faded. They headed out of town on a well-worn road that cut through rolling grassland dotted with scrub brush and the occasional stand of trees. The mountains grew larger as they traveled, their presence both magnificent and slightly intimidating. Carter pointed out landmarks as they went, explaining the lay of the land and the boundaries of various properties. "That is the Donovan spread," he said, gesturing to the north. "That is where I worked when I first came out here. Patrick Donovan gave me my start, taught me everything I know about ranching. He is a good man, fair but tough. His daughter Emily runs the business side of things now that he is getting older. She has got a head for numbers that puts most men to shame." "Is she one of the unmarried women you mentioned?" Victoria asked, curious despite herself. "She is," Carter confirmed. "But like I said, I have known her since she was a kid. She is more like a sister to me than anything else. And besides, she has got her eye on the foreman of their outfit, though neither of them will admit it yet." They rounded a bend, and suddenly a house came into view, nestled in a small valley with a stream running nearby. It was not large, just a single story with a covered porch running along the front, but it looked solid and well maintained. A barn stood off to one side, and beyond it Victoria could see a smaller building that must be the bunkhouse Carter had mentioned. "There it is," Carter said, and Victoria could hear the pride in his voice. "Home." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and Victoria took a moment to study it more carefully. The logs were weathered but sound. The roof looked recently repaired, and someone had planted flowers in barrels on either side of the door, their bright blooms a cheerful splash of color against the earth tones of the surrounding landscape. "The flowers were my mother's idea," Carter said, following her gaze. "Before she passed, she always said a house should have something beautiful about it, something to remind you that there is more to life than just work. I have tried to keep them going in her memory." The revelation that he tended those flowers himself, that he honored his mother by maintaining something beautiful despite the hard, practical realities of ranch life, made Victoria's heart squeeze with affection. "It is lovely," she said honestly. "The whole place is lovely, Carter." He looked relieved and pleased, and he helped her down from the wagon with careful attention. "Let me show you inside." The interior was dim after the bright sunshine, and Victoria blinked as her eyes adjusted. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table with chairs in the center. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was remarkably clean and organized for a bachelor's household. "I have been trying to keep things tidy," Carter admitted, following her gaze. "I did not want you to arrive and think you were marrying a complete slob. There are 2 bedrooms off the main room. The larger one is mine, but obviously that will be ours once we are married. The smaller one can be a spare room or an office, whatever you want to use it for. Eventually, we will need to expand when we have children, but for now it suits my needs well enough." The casual mention of children, spoken as though it was simply a given that they would have them, made Victoria's cheeks warm. But it also felt right somehow, natural rather than presumptuous. She explored the house carefully, taking in the details. The bedroom Carter used was as neat as the main room, the bed made with military precision, and his few personal belongings arranged with care. She saw a small daguerreotype on the dresser and moved closer, recognizing a younger Carter standing between a woman who must have been his mother and a man presumably his father. "That was taken right before I left for the war," Carter said from the doorway. "It is the only picture I have of all 3 of us together. My father died while I was away, got kicked by a horse and never recovered. My mother passed 2 years ago from pneumonia. I miss them both every day." Victoria turned to look at him, seeing the grief in his eyes that mirrored her own. "We are both orphans then," she said softly. "Both alone in the world until now." "Not alone anymore," Carter said, moving into the room. "That is the whole point of this, is it not? Building a new family, creating something that endures. My parents had a good marriage despite the hardships they faced. They loved each other truly, supported each other through difficult times. That is what I want, Victoria. That is what I hope we can have together." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the naked honesty in his voice. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want to build something real, something lasting. I want to create a home and a family and a life worth living." Carter crossed the remaining distance between them, stopping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Then let us do it," he said quietly. "Let us take this chance and see what we can make of it. I know a week is not very long, but I already know I want this, Victoria. I want you. Not just as a housekeeper or a cook or someone to warm my bed, though I certainly hope we will have that as well eventually. I want a partner. I want someone to talk to at the end of a long day, someone to make plans with and dream with. And I think you are that person. I think we could be really happy together if we are both willing to try." Victoria looked up into his green eyes and saw nothing but sincerity there, nothing but hope and determination, and the beginning of something that could grow into love if they nurtured it properly. And she realized that somewhere between stepping off that train yesterday and standing here in his bedroom looking at the photograph of his lost family, she had stopped being afraid. "I think so too," she said. And then she did something bold, something that would have shocked her former self. She rose up on her toes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, her lips brushing against the slight roughness of his afternoon stubble. Carter went very still, and for a moment, Victoria worried she had overstepped. But then his arms came up slowly, carefully, wrapping around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. He was warm and solid and real, and she let herself lean into him, her cheek against his chest where she could hear the steady thunder of his heartbeat. "Thank you for taking a chance on me," Carter murmured into her hair. "Thank you for being brave enough to come all this way." "Thank you for being exactly who you seem to be," Victoria replied. "Thank you for making this feel possible." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet of the afternoon, and Victoria felt something inside her that had been tightly clenched since her family died finally begin to relax. She was going to be all right. They were going to be all right. This terrifying leap of faith was going to work out after all. Eventually they pulled apart, both of them slightly flushed and awkward, and Carter cleared his throat. "Would you like to see the rest of the property? I can introduce you to the ranch hands if they are around." They spent the next hour exploring the grounds, and Carter pointed out where he planned to expand the barn, where he wanted to put in a vegetable garden come spring, where the fence line needed mending. Two men emerged from the barn as they approached, and Carter waved them over. "Victoria, these are my ranch hands, Daniel Walsh and Thomas Gray. Gentlemen, this is Miss Victoria Montgomery, my intended." Both men removed their hats and offered respectful greetings. Daniel was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. Thomas was younger, maybe 30, with dark skin and a reserved manner. Both looked competent and hardworking, and both seemed genuinely pleased to hear that Carter was getting married. "About time you found yourself a woman," Daniel said with a grin. "This old ranch has been needing a lady's touch for a while now. And maybe some decent cooking," Thomas added with a slight smile. "No offense, boss, but your biscuits could double as building materials." Carter laughed good-naturedly at the teasing, and Victoria found herself smiling as well. There was an easy camaraderie between the three men that spoke of mutual respect and genuine friendship, despite their employer-employee relationship. They chatted for a few more minutes, and then Carter suggested they head back to town before it got too late. The ride back was comfortable, filled with easy conversation about the ranch and plans for the future. Carter asked Victoria about her skills, what she knew how to do and what she might want to learn. "I can cook and sew reasonably well," Victoria told him. "My mother made sure I knew the basics of running a household. I can tend a garden if we plant one, though I have never grown anything more complicated than herbs and vegetables. I can read and write and do figures, and I am fairly good at organizing things. I do not know anything about ranching, though, about cattle or horses beyond the very basics." "That is all right," Carter assured her. "You will learn as you go, and I will teach you whatever you want to know. The important thing is that you are willing to work, willing to be a true partner in this enterprise. And from everything I have seen, you are." They reached town as the sun was beginning to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange. Carter walked her back to the hotel, and at her door, he took both her hands in his. "Tomorrow is Sunday," he said. "Would you like to attend church services with me? It would be a good opportunity to meet more people, and I think Reverend Phillips would appreciate seeing you there." "I would like that very much," Victoria said. "What time?" "I will come collect you at 9, Carter said. "Services start at 9:30, and then perhaps we could have Sunday dinner together after. I know a spot by the river that is particularly nice this time of year." We could have a picnic if the weather holds." "That sounds wonderful," Victoria said, meaning it completely. Carter lifted her hands to his lips, kissing first one and then the other, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sleep well, Victoria. I will see you in the morning." She watched him walk away, her hands still tingling from his touch, and felt her heart swell with something she was afraid to name yet, but that felt suspiciously like happiness. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, and Victoria dressed with care in her best dress, a deep burgundy silk that had been her mother's, and that she had altered to fit herself after the funeral. It was the finest thing she owned, saved for special occasions, and she wanted to look her best for her first appearance at church as Carter's intended. When she descended to the lobby, she found Carter waiting, looking striking in a dark suit that emphasized his height and broad shoulders. His eyes widened when he saw her, and the appreciation in his gaze made her glad she had taken the extra time with her appearance. "You look absolutely beautiful," he said, offering his arm. "I am going to be the envy of every man in that church." "You look very handsome yourself," Victoria replied, pleased by the compliment. "I did not realize you owned such a fine suit." "I bought it special for the wedding," Carter admitted. "But I figured I might as well start wearing it now, break it in a bit. Besides, I wanted to look my best for you." The church was already half full when they arrived, and Victoria felt every head turn as Carter guided her to a pew near the front. She kept her chin up and her expression serene, refusing to let the stairs intimidate her. Carter seemed completely unconcerned by the attention, greeting people warmly and introducing Victoria to those seated nearby. The service itself was traditional and comforting. Reverend Phillips preaching about faith and community and the importance of welcoming strangers. Victoria suspected the sermon had been chosen with her in mind, and she appreciated the gesture. The congregation sang hymns she remembered from childhood, and the familiar ritual of it all made her feel more settled than she had since leaving Philadelphia. After the service, people crowded around to introduce themselves and offer welcomes. Most seemed genuinely friendly, though Victoria caught a few speculative looks and whispered comments that made her suspect not everyone was pleased by her arrival. But Carter stayed close by her side, his presence supportive without being overbearing, and gradually Victoria began to relax. One woman in particular caught her attention, a tall, striking blonde in her late 20s who approached with confident strides and a warm smile. "Carter," she said, embracing him briefly, "and you must be Victoria. I am Emily Donovan. My father owns the ranch where Carter used to work." "Emily," Carter said with obvious affection. "I am glad you are here. Victoria, Emily is one of the people I was telling you about. She is the one who actually runs the Donovan operation these days." "My father likes to think he is still in charge," Emily said with a grin. "But yes, I handle most of the business now. Welcome to Palisade, Victoria. I hope Carter is treating you well." "He has been wonderful," Victoria said honestly, liking this forthright woman immediately. "Very patient with all my Eastern ignorance about Western life." "Oh, you will learn quickly enough," Emily assured her. "And if you ever need anything, please do not hesitate to come find me." It is nice to have another woman around who is not afraid to speak her mind. Most of the ladies here are sweet enough but tend to defer to their husbands on everything. Gets a bit tiresome when you are trying to talk business. They chatted for a few more minutes, and Emily extracted a promise from Victoria to come visit the Donovan ranch soon. "I will show you around properly," she said. "And you can meet my father. He has been dying to meet the woman who finally convinced Carter to settle down." When Emily moved on to speak with others, Carter guided Victoria toward the wagon. "What did you think of her?" "I liked her very much," Victoria said. She seems like someone who would make a good friend. She is, Carter confirmed. Emily does not suffer fools, and she can be a bit intimidating when she is in business mode. But she is loyal and kind to the people she cares about. I think you two will get along well. They collected a basket that Carter had arranged with the hotel kitchen, filled with cold chicken and bread and cheese and apples, and drove out to the spot Carter had mentioned. It was alongside a small river that wound through the grassland, shaded by a stand of cottonwood trees that provided relief from the sun. The water burbled over smooth stones, and the air smelled green and fresh and alive. Carter spread a blanket on the grass, and they settled down to eat, the food simple but delicious. After they had finished, they sat watching the water flow past, and Victoria found herself telling Carter about her life before, about growing up in Philadelphia, about her parents and her brother, about the small joys and sorrows that had made up her existence. Carter listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions and offering comments that showed he was truly engaged with her stories. And then he told her about his own childhood in Missouri, about growing up on a small farm, about the decision to enlist when war broke out, about the things he had seen and done that still haunted him sometimes in the dark of night. "I do not talk about the war much," he admitted. "Most men who went through it do not. But I want you to know that there are times when the memories hit me hard, when I wake up from a nightmare or get quiet and withdrawn. It is not you, Victoria. It is just the ghosts that followed me home. My father used to say that everyone carries ghosts," Victoria said softly. "The trick is not to let them crowd out the living. I think we can help each other with that, Carter. We can be each other's reminder that there is still good in the world, still things worth fighting for and dreaming about." Carter turned to look at her, his green eyes intense. "You are remarkable, do you know that? I knew you were special from your letters, but actually knowing you, seeing your strength and grace, it is even better than I imagined." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she did not look away. "I feel the same about you. I was so afraid you would not be real, that the kind and thoughtful man from the letters would turn out to be a fiction. But you are exactly who you seem to be, Carter, maybe even better." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek with his calloused hand. His touch was gentle despite the roughness of his skin, and Victoria found herself leaning into it. "I want to kiss you," Carter said quietly, "but only if that is all right with you. I do not want to presume." In answer, Victoria closed the small distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that started gentle and sweet, but quickly deepened into something more. Carter's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Victoria felt her entire body come alive with sensation. His lips were warm and firm, moving against hers with increasing confidence, and when his tongue traced the seam of her mouth, she opened for him without hesitation. Time seemed to stop as they kissed beneath the cottonwood trees, the sound of the river providing a gentle soundtrack to their exploration of each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Carter rested his forehead against hers. "Definitely getting married on Saturday," he murmured, his voice rough with want. "Waiting any longer would be torture." Victoria laughed breathlessly, her heart racing. "I am not sure I can wait even that long," she admitted, shocking herself with her boldness. Carter groaned and pulled her close again, but this time he simply held her, his lips pressed to the top of her head. "We will wait," he said firmly. "I want to do this properly, Victoria. I want our wedding night to be special, something we can remember fondly rather than something we rushed into because we could not control ourselves. Can you understand that?" Victoria nodded against his chest, moved by his consideration even as her body protested the delay. "I understand. And you are right. but it is going to be a very long week." "The longest of my life," Carter agreed fervently. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the river, talking and laughing and stealing occasional kisses that left them both flushed and wanting more. By the time Carter drove her back to town, the sun was sinking low, and Victoria felt more at peace than she had since before her family had taken ill. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Victoria spent her mornings getting to know the town better, visiting the general store and chatting with the other women she met. Mrs. Patterson took her under her wing, introducing her around and helping her pick out fabric for a new dress to wear as her wedding gown. The options were limited, but Victoria found a beautiful cream-colored muslin with tiny flowers embroidered around the hem and sleeves, and Mrs. Patterson insisted on helping her sew it. "You are going to be a beautiful bride," the older woman said as they worked on the dress together in the small parlor behind the store. "And Carter is a good man, one of the best. You are lucky to have found each other." In the afternoons, Carter would appear to spend time with her, showing her more of the area and telling her stories about the land and the people who lived there. They visited the Donovan Ranch one day, and Victoria found herself charmed by Emily's father, a gruff man with kind eyes who clearly adored his daughter and approved wholeheartedly of Carter. "About time you settled down," Patrick Donovan told Carter firmly. "And you have chosen well. Miss Montgomery has sense and steel, I can tell. She will make you a fine wife." As Saturday approached, Victoria found herself growing both excited and nervous. The reality of what she was about to do hit her at odd moments. The knowledge that in just days she would be married to a man she had known for barely a week, sharing his bed and his life and his future. But each time the panic threatened to overwhelm her, she would remember Carter's kind eyes and gentle voice, the way he made her feel safe and valued and desired, and the fear would recede. Friday evening, Carter took her to dinner at the hotel one final time as an unmarried couple. "Tomorrow your life changes forever," he said seriously, holding her hand across the table. "Are you ready for that, Victoria? Truly ready?" "I am terrified," Victoria admitted. "But yes, I am ready. I want this, Carter, I want you. I want the life we are going to build together." "Good," Carter said with satisfaction. "Because I want it too, more than I have ever wanted anything. You have become precious to me this week, Victoria. I know it is too soon to call it love, but I think we are well on our way there. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking this chance on me." "I could say the same thing," Victoria said softly. "You have given me hope when I thought I would never feel it again. You have made me believe in possibilities I had given up on. Whatever comes, Carter, I am grateful for that." They spent the evening talking quietly about the future, about the plans they had for the ranch, about the family they hoped to build. Carter spoke of wanting children, several if they were blessed, and of raising them to be strong and kind and respectful. Victoria shared her dreams of creating a real home, a place of warmth and love where everyone felt safe and valued. When he finally walked her to her room for the last time as her betrothed, Carter pulled her into a long, slow kiss that left her breathless and aching. "Tomorrow," he murmured against her lips. "Tomorrow you become mine and I become yours. I can hardly wait." "Neither can I," Victoria whispered, and meant it with her whole heart. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue with just a few wispy clouds drifting past. Victoria woke early, her heart pounding with anticipation and nerves, and took her time getting ready. She bathed with the last of the rose-scented soap she had brought from Philadelphia, a luxury she had been saving for this occasion, and carefully pinned up her hair in an elaborate style that Mrs. Patterson had shown her earlier in the week. The cream-colored dress fit perfectly, the embroidered flowers catching the light as she turned in front of the small mirror. She looked different, Victoria thought, not just because of the dress or the hair, but because something in her face had changed. She looked hopeful. She looked happy. She looked like a woman in love, even if she had not quite admitted it to herself yet. A knock at the door made her jump, and she opened it to find Emily standing there, dressed in a lovely blue gown and carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I thought you might like some company while you get ready," Emily said with a warm smile. "And I brought you these for your bouquet. I picked them this morning from the fields around our ranch." Victoria accepted the flowers with grateful hands, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Emily. That is so kind. We women have to stick together," Emily said, coming into the room and looking Victoria over with an approving eye. "You look absolutely beautiful, Victoria. Carter is going to be speechless when he sees you." They spent the next hour together, Emily helping with final touches and distracting Victoria from her nerves with funny stories about growing up on the ranch and the various disasters that had befallen the Donovan family over the years. By the time they needed to leave for the church, Victoria felt calmer, ready to take this final step into her new life. The church was already filling with people when they arrived, far more than Victoria had expected. Apparently, the entire town had decided to attend, curious to see the mail-order bride marry the cowboy. Victoria felt a momentary flutter of panic at all the eyes watching her, but then she saw Carter standing at the front of the church beside Reverend Phillips, and everything else faded away. He looked devastating in his new suit, his dark hair neatly combed and his green eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. As she walked slowly up the aisle, her hand resting lightly on Emily's arm since she had no father to give her away, Victoria could not look away from him. This man, she thought with wonder. This good, kind, patient man was about to become her husband. When she reached the front, Emily squeezed her hand briefly and stepped aside, and Victoria moved to stand beside Carter. He reached for her hand immediately, his fingers warm and strong, and leaned close to whisper, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back, not wanting to cry during her own wedding. "You are not so bad yourself," she whispered back, and was rewarded with a brilliant smile. Reverend Phillips cleared his throat and began the ceremony, his voice warm and sure as he spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the commitment they were about to make to each other. Victoria heard the words as if from a distance, her entire focus on Carter, on the way his thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, on the love and devotion clear in his eyes. When it came time for the vows, Carter's voice was steady and strong. "I, Carter Henry Xavier, take you, Victoria Rose Montgomery, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love and cherish you, to honor and respect you, to stand by your side in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, for as long as we both shall live." Victoria's voice trembled slightly, but she got through her vows without stumbling. "I, Victoria Rose Montgomery, take you, Carter Henry Xavier, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love and cherish you, to honor and respect you, to stand by your side in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, for as long as we both shall live." Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, and Carter did not wait for permission before pulling Victoria into his arms and kissing her thoroughly, to the delight of everyone watching. The church erupted in applause and cheers, but Victoria barely heard it, lost in the feel of Carter's lips on hers, and the knowledge that he was now her husband. They signed the marriage certificate in the small office behind the church, Emily and Patrick Donovan serving as witnesses, and then they emerged to find the entire congregation waiting to congratulate them. Victoria shook more hands than she could count, received more well wishes than she could keep track of, and through it all Carter stayed close by her side, his presence steady and reassuring. Mrs. Patterson and several other ladies had organized a reception of sorts in the church hall, with food and punch, and even a small cake. Victoria was overwhelmed by the generosity of people who barely knew her, by the way the town had embraced her and welcomed her into their community. She said as much to Carter as they cut the cake together, his hand over hers on the knife. "They are good people," Carter said quietly, "and they can see how happy you make me. That is all that matters to them." The celebration continued for several hours, but eventually Carter leaned close and murmured in her ear, "What do you say we slip away? I would very much like to take my wife home now." Victoria felt heat flood through her at the word wife and the promise implicit in his tone. "I would like that very much." They said their goodbyes, accepting final congratulations and well wishes, and then Carter helped her up into the wagon. Someone had tied tin cans to the back, and they clattered noisily as Carter urged the horses forward, making Victoria laugh despite her nerves about what came next. The drive to the ranch had never felt so long, even though Carter pushed the horses faster than was probably strictly wise. By the time they arrived, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost impossibly beautiful. Carter jumped down and came around to help Victoria descend, but instead of setting her on her feet, he swept her up into his arms. "Threshold," he said by way of explanation, carrying her toward the house. "I want to do this right." Victoria wrapped her arms around his neck and let him carry her, marveling at his strength and the rightness of being held this way. He maneuvered them through the door without bumping her head, then set her down carefully in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," he said softly, his eyes warm with love and desire. "It is good to be home," Victoria replied, and realized she meant it completely. This was home now, this place with this man. Everything that had come before was just prologue to this moment, to this beginning. Carter cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently, as though she was something precious and fragile. "I know you must be nervous," he said quietly. "We have not talked much about this part, about what happens tonight. But I want you to know that we will go at whatever pace you need, Victoria. There is no rush. We have the rest of our lives." Victoria appreciated his consideration, but she also felt the heat pooling low in her belly. The desire that had been building all week finally allowed free rein now that they were married. "I trust you," she said simply. "Show me, Carter. Show me what it means to be yours." Something flared hot in his eyes, and his kiss turned more demanding, his hands moving to the buttons at the back of her dress. Victoria helped him, her own fingers working at the buttons of his shirt, and soon they were peeling away layers of fabric, revealing skin to skin until they stood in their undergarments, breathing hard and staring at each other. "Bedroom," Carter managed, and Victoria nodded, taking his hand and letting him lead her to the room that was now theirs. What followed was a revelation, tender and passionate and occasionally awkward as they learned each other's bodies and preferences. Carter was patient and attentive, making sure Victoria was ready before pushing forward, swallowing her small cry of pain with kisses and holding still until her body adjusted to the intrusion. And then they were moving together, finding a rhythm that felt right, that built pleasure between them until Victoria was crying out his name and Carter was groaning hers, and they fell apart together in a tangle of sweaty limbs and racing hearts. Afterward they lay wrapped around each other, Victoria's head on Carter's chest and his fingers trailing lazy patterns up and down her back. That was, she began, then stopped, unsure how to articulate what she felt. Perfect, Carter finished for her. That was perfect, Victoria. You are perfect. I was going to say better than I expected, Victoria admitted with a small laugh. But perfect works too. They talked quietly in the gathering darkness, unwilling to leave the cocoon of their bed even to light a lamp. Carter told her about his plans for expanding the ranch, his dreams of building something substantial that they could pass on to their children someday. Victoria shared her hopes of making the house into a real home, of planting gardens and maybe raising chickens and creating a space that was warm and welcoming. We are really doing this, Victoria said wonderingly. Building a life together, starting a family. We really are, Carter agreed, pulling her closer. And I cannot wait to see where we are in 5 years, 10 years, 20. I have a feeling we are going to do great things together, Mrs. Xavier. I think so too, Victoria whispered and kissed him again, the touch sparking desire that had them reaching for each other once more in the darkness. The first weeks of married life were an adjustment for both of them, learning to share space and coordinate routines and navigate the small conflicts that arose from two people with different backgrounds trying to merge their lives. But they approached each challenge with patience and humor, talking through disagreements rather than letting them fester, and gradually they found their rhythm. Victoria threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains for the windows and organizing the kitchen to her satisfaction, and starting to plan what she would plant in the garden come spring. She learned to cook on the wood stove, a skill that took more trial and error than she had anticipated. But Carter ate every failed experiment with good-natured appreciation and genuine gratitude that she was trying. She also began learning about the ranch itself, accompanying Carter on rides around the property and learning to identify the different cattle and understand the work that went into maintaining the fences and water sources. Daniel and Thomas proved to be patient teachers, showing her the basics of handling horses and explaining the rhythms of ranch life. Carter proved to be everything Victoria could have hoped for in a husband. He was unfailingly kind and patient, quick to help with household tasks, and never assuming that certain work was beneath him because he was a man. He made her laugh with stories from his past and listened with genuine interest when she talked about her own experiences. And at night, when they closed the door to their bedroom, he made her feel cherished and desired in ways she had never imagined. As October gave way to November, and the weather grew colder, Victoria realized she had stopped thinking of this life as new and strange. It had simply become her life, as natural as breathing. The mountains no longer seemed intimidating but protective. The vast sky felt expansive rather than overwhelming, and the man who had been a stranger just months ago had become the center of her world. One evening in mid-November, as they sat by the fire after supper, Victoria realized she needed to tell Carter something important. She had been waiting to be absolutely certain, but now there was no doubt. "Carter," she said softly, catching his attention, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the book he had been reading, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful," Victoria assured him with a smile. "Better than wonderful. Carter, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." The book fell from his hands, forgotten, and his face transformed with such pure joy that Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. "Truly?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be," Victoria confirmed. "I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been feeling ill in the mornings. I think the baby will come sometime in late June or early July." Carter crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she was made of glass. "A baby," he breathed into her hair. "We are going to have a baby. Victoria, you have made me the happiest man alive." Victoria clung to him, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the rightness of it all. "I was afraid to hope," she admitted. "It seemed too soon, too perfect." "But it is real, Carter. We are going to be parents." They spent the evening making plans, talking about all the things they would need to prepare before the baby arrived. Carter was already thinking about expanding the house, adding rooms for the children they would hopefully have. Victoria was thinking about all the small things she would need to sew and prepare, the tiny clothes and blankets and diapers. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite the occasional bout of morning sickness that left Victoria feeling miserable. Carter hovered like a worried mother hen, trying to anticipate her every need and constantly checking to make sure she was not overdoing things. Victoria found it sweet but occasionally annoying, and they had their first real argument when Carter suggested she stop doing any heavy work around the house. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Victoria said firmly. "I can still cook and clean and do the laundry. I will not break, Carter." "I know that," Carter said, clearly trying to be patient. "But I worry about you, about the baby. I do not want anything to go wrong." "Nothing is going to go wrong," Victoria assured him, softening at the genuine fear in his eyes. "But you have to let me keep living my life." "I will be careful, I promise, but I need to feel useful, to feel like I am still capable. Can you understand that?" Carter had pulled her into his arms and held her close. "I am sorry. You are right. I am being overprotective. It is just that you and this baby, you are my whole world now. The thought of losing either of you terrifies me." "You are not going to lose us," Victoria said firmly, tilting her head up to kiss him. "We are strong, both of us. We are going to be fine." As winter settled over the ranch, covering everything in snow and making travel to town difficult, Victoria found herself grateful for Carter's company and the cozy intimacy of being snowed in together. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or playing cards or simply talking about anything and everything. Emily Donovan visited when the weather permitted, bringing supplies and gossip from town and checking to make sure Victoria was managing all right. The two women had become close friends over the past months, and Victoria treasured having another woman to talk to about the realities of pregnancy and life in the West. "You are doing remarkably well," Emily said one snowy afternoon as they sat sewing baby clothes together. "Some women have a terrible time of it, but you seem to be taking it in stride." "I have moments of feeling overwhelmed," Victoria admitted, "but mostly I am just excited. Terrified, but excited. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Emily assured her. "You are going to be a wonderful mother, Victoria, and Carter is going to be a wonderful father. That baby is lucky to have you both." Christmas came and went, celebrated quietly but joyfully with just the two of them and Daniel and Thomas joining them for a special dinner. Carter surprised Victoria with a beautiful shawl he had secretly ordered from Denver, and she gave him a new pair of riding gloves she had painstakingly sewn herself. As the new year of 1879 began, Victoria felt her belly growing larger, the baby's presence becoming more and more real. The first time she felt movement, she grabbed Carter's hand and pressed it to her stomach, watching his face light up with wonder as he felt his child move beneath his palm. "That is our baby," he said with awe. "That is our child, Victoria. I can feel it." They spent hours like that over the following months, Carter's hand on her belly as they felt the baby kick and squirm, both of them marveling at the miracle they had created together. Spring arrived late but welcome, the snow finally melting to reveal green grass and wildflowers. Victoria worked on preparing the room they had designated as the nursery, washing the tiny clothes she had made and arranging the cradle that Carter had built with his own hands. Everything was ready, and now all they could do was wait. The baby decided to arrive on a hot July afternoon, announcing its imminent arrival with pains that grew steadily stronger. Carter immediately sent Thomas racing to town to fetch the doctor and the midwife, while Daniel kept him company and tried to keep him calm as Victoria labored in their bedroom. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Carter paced outside the bedroom door, wearing a path in the wooden floor, his heart in his throat every time he heard Victoria cry out. Finally, just as the sun was rising, a new sound joined the chorus, the angry, healthy wail of a newborn baby. The bedroom door opened and the midwife emerged with a tired but triumphant smile. "You have a son, Mr. Xavier, a strong, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully. She is exhausted but fine." Carter did not wait for permission, pushing past the midwife to get to Victoria's side. She lay in the bed, pale and sweaty and more beautiful than he had ever seen her, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. Her eyes were shining with tears and joy as she looked up at him. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Carter approached slowly, almost afraid to believe it was real. Victoria pulled back the blanket, revealing a tiny red face topped with dark hair, and Carter felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "He is perfect," Carter whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand with a gentle finger. The baby's fist closed reflexively around his fingertip, and Carter felt tears stream down his face without shame. "He is absolutely perfect, Victoria, just like his mother." "What should we name him?" Victoria asked, looking between her husband and her son with so much love Carter felt overwhelmed by it. They had discussed names extensively over the past months, but now that the moment had arrived, Carter knew exactly what felt right. "What about Samuel?" he suggested quietly. "After your brother, I think he would have liked that." Victoria's face crumpled with emotion and she nodded through her tears. "Samuel Carter Xavier, it is perfect." They spent the next days in a blissful haze of exhaustion and wonder, learning how to care for their son and marveling at every tiny feature and sound he made. Daniel and Thomas took over the ranch work without complaint, giving Carter time to focus on his new family. Emily visited as soon as she heard the news, bringing gifts and congratulations, and taking turns holding the baby while Victoria rested. As the weeks passed, and they adjusted to life with an infant, Carter and Victoria fell even more deeply in love, their bond strengthened by the shared experience of parenthood. They took turns walking the floor with a fussy Samuel in the middle of the night, supported each other through the challenges of figuring out feeding and sleeping schedules, and celebrated every small milestone together. One evening, when Samuel was about 2 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Carter and Victoria sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Victoria leaned against her husband's side, his arm wrapped securely around her shoulders, and thought about how much her life had changed in just over a year. "You remember that day I stepped off the train?" Victoria asked quietly. "I was so terrified I could barely stand." "I remember," Carter said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I was terrified too, if I am being honest. What if you took one look at me and got right back on that train? What if we had nothing to say to each other? What if the whole thing was a terrible mistake? And instead it was the best decision either of us ever made," Victoria said with satisfaction. "We took a chance on each other, Carter. We were brave enough to hope for something better, and look what we built. A home, a family, a life worth living." "I love you," Carter said, the words he had been saying more and more often over the past months, but that never lost their power. I love you more than I ever thought possible. You and Samuel, you are everything to me." "I love you too," Victoria replied, turning her head to kiss him properly. "So much, Carter. Thank you for being exactly who you promised to be. Thank you for making me feel safe enough to be exactly who I am. Thank you for this life." They sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, talking quietly about their plans for the future. They wanted more children, at least 2 or 3 more if they were blessed. Carter wanted to expand the ranch, maybe bring in some help as the operation grew. Victoria wanted to start teaching Samuel his letters once he was old enough. Maybe eventually gather some of the other ranch children for lessons if their parents were interested. "We should probably go check on him," Victoria said eventually, though she was reluctant to move from the warm circle of Carter's arms. "Probably," Carter agreed, but neither of them moved immediately. Finally, with matching sighs of contentment, they rose and headed inside to their sleeping son. The years that followed were full of both challenges and joys. The ranch prospered under Carter's careful management, the herd growing steadily, and the house expanding to accommodate their growing family. A daughter, Rose Elizabeth, arrived 2 years after Samuel, her birth easier than her brother's had been. Another son, Henry Patrick, followed 2 years after that, and finally a second daughter, Margaret Jane, completed their family when Victoria was 30 years old. The house that had once seemed almost too large for 2 people now rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing, with footsteps pounding up and down the hallway and voices calling out questions and observations. Victoria and Carter navigated the chaos with patience and humor, presenting a united front when discipline was required, but never forgetting to show affection and appreciation for each other. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning almost as much as he loved helping his father with the ranch. Rose was spirited and bold, unafraid of anything, and determined to prove she could do anything her brother could do. Henry was gentle and artistic, always drawing pictures or making up songs. And Margaret, the baby, wrapped everyone around her little finger with her sweet disposition and ready smile. Emily Donovan became a regular presence in their lives, a beloved aunt to the children and a trusted friend to both Victoria and Carter. She eventually married her foreman, James Harrison, in a wedding that had half of Colorado in attendance, and her father Patrick became a grandfather figure to the Xavier children, teaching them about cattle and horses and what it meant to work hard and take pride in what you built. Daniel and Thomas remained with the ranch for years, becoming part of the extended family. When Daniel finally retired, his arthritis making the work too difficult, Carter made sure he had a comfortable cabin on the property and a steady income for the rest of his days. Thomas eventually met and married a widow from town, bringing her and her young daughter to the ranch and building them a house on the far edge of Xavier land. Victoria never forgot that first day, stepping off the train and trembling with fear and uncertainty. But as the years passed and her hair began to show threads of silver, as she watched her children grow and her husband's face gain new lines from sun and smiling, she thought about how one moment of courage had changed everything. She was hanging laundry on a warm summer day when Carter appeared, stealing up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him automatically, comfortable in a way that came from decades of practice. "What are you thinking about?" Carter asked, his lips brushing her ear. "About how lucky we are," Victoria said honestly. "About how easily things could have gone differently. What if I had been too afraid to answer your advertisement? What if you had changed your mind? What if we had not suited after all?" "But you did, and I did not, and we did," Carter said firmly. We took a chance on each other, Victoria, and every day since we have chosen each other again and again. That is what love is, I think. Not just the falling, but the choosing. The deciding every single day that this person, this life, this is what matters. When did you get so philosophical? Victoria teased, turning in his arms to face him. I have always been philosophical, Carter protested with mock offense. You just bring it out of me. Victoria laughed and kissed him, as natural and easy as breathing after all these years. They heard shrieks of laughter from the direction of the creek, where the children were supposed to be doing chores, and both smiled knowingly. Should we go supervise? Victoria asked without much enthusiasm. Probably, Carter agreed, but let us give them 5 more minutes. They are only children once, after all. They stood together in the sunshine, the mountains rising in the distance and the life they had built stretching out around them, and Victoria felt a peace so complete it was almost overwhelming. This, she thought, this was what she had been meant for all along. Not the life she had planned in Philadelphia, but this one, here in the wild Colorado territory with a cowboy whose gentle voice had calmed her trembling soul and shown her what real love could be. Thank you, she said suddenly, intensely, gripping Carter's hand tight. For what? He asked, though his eyes showed he understood. For everything, Victoria said. For being patient with me, for giving me time to trust, for building this life with me, for loving me exactly as I am, for our children, for every single day of the past 20 years, for all of it, Carter. Thank you for all of it. Carter cupped her face in his calloused hands, those remarkable green eyes full of the same love and devotion they had held on their wedding day. It has been my greatest honor and privilege, he said seriously. Loving you, building this family with you, watching you become the amazing woman and mother you are. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, Victoria. Every challenge, every struggle, every moment. All of it was worth it to end up here now with you. They kissed again, slow and sweet, a reaffirmation of the promises they had made to each other all those years ago. And when they finally pulled apart and headed toward the creek to corral their children, they walked hand in hand, partners in every sense of the word. Their love story one for the ages, even if no one but them would ever know all the details. The sun shone bright overhead, the Colorado sky stretched endless and blue, and Carter Xavier, formerly of Philadelphia but now and forever of this wild, beautiful place, could not imagine being anywhere else in the world.